Good afternoon. I did not bring this cup of coffee to stage because I need some caffeine to get going. And believe me, my adrenaline levels are probably the highest of all persons in this building right now. I brought this cup of coffee to stage because I think it's a perfect example of value creation within the food and agri complex. Every morning, I enter a Starbucks, Pacific Coffee, a Costa, or any of those coffee chains that are numerous around us today. And every day, I don't even think 1 second to pay $5 for a cup like this. I am not raised to pay $5 for a cup of coffee. When I was a kid, my family took me on holiday for 2-3 weeks a year. And although these holidays within our family were weeks of spending, my mother always was very reluctant to buy a cup of coffee. Explanation was always the same. For the price of that cup of coffee, I can buy 500 grams of coffee beans, and with those 500 grams of coffee beans, I can make you 30 cups of coffee at home. So what has changed between then and now? Obviously, a larger share of world population has grown substantially wealthier. Spending on food and beverages as a percentage of disposable income has come down, so the affordability of coffee went up. But this is not entirely explaining the huge value growth the coffee industry has experienced over the last 30 years. We have to give credit to the suppliers, to some early entrepreneurs in the coffee industry. The cup of coffee you buy today is not solely a carrier for caffeine. If you today go into any of those coffee chains I mentioned, you cannot only buy a cup of coffee, you have a whole range of a coffee menu. And I think the most famous story is about Howard Schultz, 1982. He was the marketing manager of Starbucks. At that time, a very small local franchise. He traveled to Italy and he brought cappuccino and latte from Italy into the US. Next year, his revenue tripled. Today, Howard Schultz is the CEO of Starbucks. And I think most of you know Starbucks. But it's not only providing consumers a choice. It's also about addressing consumers' moral conscience. If you buy this cup of coffee we have made with our fair trade beans, we will make sure that we educate, give a decent price to all those small coffee farmers in all those developing countries where coffee is produced. But you have to pay a little premium. And even that's not all. It's about lifestyle. If I enter one of those coffee chains, I have to stumble across students, stumble across people who work in each of those coffee chains, restaurants or shops. It's always a dangerous word to mention coffee shop in a Dutch context. But anyway, so this is the success of coffee, creating value by adhering to consumer demand or even creating consumer demand, improving, increasing, expanding the value parameters of your product. And this is what I had to think when I was just before the summer visiting one of our large farmers in the US. A big row crop farmer, corn and soy, top from a skill perspective, top from a technical performance perspective, top from a financial perspective. And I was geared up to teach him everything I knew about technological innovations at his farm. After 15 minutes in our discussion, sitting at his kitchen table, he raised his hand. And he said, Dirk, you know, I value what you have done. I appreciate your information, but honestly, I know everything. I keep and stay on touch of every technological development that's out there. Even more, I experiment with that, and some of those technological innovations, precision farming, biological pesticides, are actually working, and I'm planning to introduce those practices in my traditional farming practices. But I do have a question. I do have a question. He said, a couple of months ago, so earlier this year, I was visited by a fast-moving consumer goods company. And that fast-moving consumer goods company was asking me to allocate a couple of my hectares to non-conventional farming. That fast-moving consumer goods company itself had difficulties to grow. And this was an American company, and American company CEOs always promise high growth figures to their shareholders, and then later on they try to figure out how they are going to realize those figures. So he had promised big growth expectations and realized that growth was not going to come from volume or from traditional product characteristic types of innovations. I'm sure most of you can envision a US supermarket aisle and see all those packs of cereals stacked, different colors, different sizes, different brands, different marketing logos, but in itself all of the same products. This company wanted to create value by not addressing the product characteristics per se, but by just marketing a different production process. Non-GMO corn, non-antibiotic meat production, organic products, and that fast-moving consumer good company needed the help of that farmer. And there I was. Being marketed at that client as the strategist who was going to help that farmer developing his strategic decision-making process, and he asked me the most fundamental strategic question, and I could not answer. So instead, I made him aware of what I was starting to think when he raised the issue. You are asked to extensify, I'm not sure whether that's a good word, but extensify your farming operation to meet the demand of an affluent consumer. Well, our objective has always been to intensify, because we need to produce more with less to feed all those people in the developing world that struggle to meet their caloric daily intakes. So is global agriculture becoming a battlefield between the affluent consumer in the US and Europe, more and more in Asia, later on also in Africa, versus the 800 million people in the developing world that still need to scramble for their daily caloric intake? And as I said, I could only make him aware of my struggle. I couldn't answer. So when I went back to the offices, me and my team, we started to work on a research project, at least to try to start to answer this question. Is global agriculture becoming that battlefield between that affluent consumer and that poor fellow in Africa? our first insights show me that we can serve both. And I tell you, without elaborating too much on all the details of the research, what we have done and how we tackled the question. Obviously, agriculture, global agriculture, is very heterogeneous. From a crop perspective, from a climate perspective, so you can't make a research project that has the perspective of global agriculture. So we took the US, and within the US, we took the corn market. US, most significant player in global agriculture from a production perspective and from a trade perspective, and corn being one of their cornerstone crops in that long-term success story. And obviously, the question was raised by an American farmer, which I needed to respond to. So if you look to the global corn market and its request for natural resources, you can basically identify 4 trends that impact the need for natural resources in US corn production. 1 is a very traditional one and is an economic one, and 3 are more disruptive ones. And we actually named those 4 trends. We call them shifting acres, which is the traditional mindset of the farmer. We call them transferring acres, we call them consolidating acres, and we call them lost acres. I will address each of these very briefly to give you an idea what I mean. Shifting acres is what farmers in the US, and I guess everywhere, do when they make their yearly crop plans. If soybeans are relatively more expensive than corn, farmers allocate more land to soybeans than to corn. We do believe that protein in general is more scarce than energy. And as a result, we do believe that longer term, there will be acres shifting based on those economic parameters from corn to soybean. We estimate for the next 5 years that there will be a 2% decrease in US corn acres. So far, nothing new. But I do believe that there are, as I said, disruptive trends that will cause the US corn farmer to think about those transferring, consolidating, and lost acres. Transferring acres, I mean acres of corn basically migrating from the US to Latin America and to the former Soviet Union. The incremental costs of putting more corn on the market is much lower in those regions than it is in the US. The second dynamic is consolidating acres. The technological innovations that are brought to you and to all the farmers in the world by the big corporates ultimately will lead to a significant increase in planting density of corn. So from the same hectare of land, you can, according to our estimates, generate 30% more corn. US farmers, although they don't make money this year, have not made money in the last 2 years, will be forced to adapt those technological innovations, because that's the only way for them to maintain its competitiveness vis-à-vis Latin America and former Soviet Union. So, consolidating acres. And the fourth category is lost acres. Not that those acres are somewhere gone, but those acres are not needed for corn production in a demand perspective. And demand mainly comes from China. Without going into too much detail, but China has an option when it comes to food security. They can import corn and transfer corn into pork meat to satisfy pork demand, or they can try to improve the efficiency of the corn to meat transfer in their own livestock industry. This is basically a choice between creating value at the US farm gate versus creating value at the Chinese livestock farmer gate. I think I know where China ultimately will put its bet upon. It's improving the livestock efficiency, livestock farming in China. And that will take out a lot of future corn demand that's currently in all the models of our clients, and sometimes even also the models we use within the bank. Based on these preliminary results, I do believe that there is room to serve those both client groups. Ultimately, we need more proof. We are currently modeling this whole exercise. But I do believe that we have a choice. And if we as a society have a choice, that basically means that you as a farmer have a choice, or put more stronger, you need to choose. And I was at the Global Farmers Masterclass yesterday, and one of the participants mentioned that to me in a very pronounced way. He said, Dirk, in the past, we could make money by just work hard. Today, we can make money by just work hard and have a little bit of luck in the markets. Tomorrow, it's work hard, have a little bit of luck in the market, but have a strategy. And I think that's the main message I want to give to you today. Consumers want choice. Consumer choices are transferred into value creation. You, as farmers, have a choice either to create the value or create the volume. The next question, I'm sure our US farmer is going to put to me on that table when I will visit him early next year, is can I do both? I don't know, but I do believe that you have to make a choice between organic, extensifying, or intensifying, putting in all the technologies. So you have a choice, but the stakeholder environment around you is changing depending on your choice. Today, you buy inputs from consolidating farm input industry, and you sell into a consolidated, if you are a field crop farmer, you sell into a consolidated origination infrastructure. And I was listening to the kitchen table discussion, and there was a lot of talk about directly discussing, communicating with the consumers. And I do believe that the other choice is going directly to the consumer, but you will need to work through the network of food processors, retailers, food service, and the consumer, if you work in an international environment. And this is the one and only flaw I saw when I was discussing the coffee value creating initiative of the last 30 years. I pay substantially more for one cup of coffee than I did, or my parents did, 30 years ago. However, the coffee farmer is not getting much more money. I asked our coffee analyst today, and the coffee farmers now get the same amount of money than they got in real terms 30 years ago. So that's the challenge we face within the industry. And if I could help you answering that challenge, I would do, but honestly, I cannot. That will be a next research project. Thank you very much.